We're here with Mr. Harold Camping today, the General Manager of Family Radio, and we just wanted to ask him a few questions here. And of course, I guess the main question would be that everyone wants to know is about Judgment Day, and maybe you can tell in your own words.
So in the original, from the original language, I never raise a question, but as I study, I check everything against the original language. By God's mercy, God gave me a whole set of books about 8 years ago that give me every word in the original Hebrew and the original Greek, giving its grammatical structure. I don't know if you've ever seen this set of books. It's a marvelous set of books.
Hello, this is Rebuttal number 2. We covered some things in Rebuttal number 1, and now in Rebuttal number 2 we're going to cover some things that I didn't cover before. Now, Harold Camping says that he goes back to the original Hebrew and Greek of Scripture. Now, there's one problem with that, is that there's a number of chapters in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that are written in Aramaic. And I wrote some of them down here, if you can see them. It's Daniel chapter 2, verse 4, going all the way through chapter 7, is written in Aramaic. In Ezra, the letters that are written there in chapter 4, beginning with verse 6, all the way to chapter 6, verse 18, are written in Aramaic. Chapter 7 of Ezra, beginning with verse 12 to 26, is also in Aramaic. We have a verse in Jeremiah, chapter 10, verse 11, and also we have a word in Genesis 31:47 in Aramaic. So we have a number of chapters, verses that are written in Aramaic. And you may be going along in Hebrew and wondering what's going on here. Right here I have the oldest, this is just a replica, a facsimile edition of the oldest Hebrew Bible today. And I'll show you a picture here. This is very heavy here, big and heavy. Let's see if we can get a close-up of that. And down in the corner here we have Daniel chapter 2, and we can see, well, I guess you can't really see, but it looks all the same. You wouldn't know that Daniel chapter 1 is in Hebrew, and then beginning chapter 2 verse 4, it switches over to Aramaic all the way through Daniel chapter 7. So there's a number of chapters, verses in the Old Testament written in Aramaic. Also, many scholars believe that Jesus spoke Aramaic. So Aramaic is a very important language, and I had to study that for my degree, and it was very interesting. Many similarities between Aramaic and Hebrew, many similar words as well. But we need to include that there's Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek that you need to study when studying the Bible from the original languages. Another important point is that in the New Testament, most of the verses in the New Testament are quoting the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. And this was the Bible of the early Christians. They didn't have the Gospels and everything yet, so their Bible was the Greek Old Testament. So you find many quotes in the New Testament is from the Septuagint, not from the Hebrew Old Testament. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. And so you'll find differences there.
The first thing that happened after about 5 years of intense study, I was always interested in the numbers in the Bible because I'm an engineer. Why did God give us these numbers here and there? And I slowly learned that finally, after about 5 years, I learned that creation occurred 11,013 BC when it's coordinated with our calendar, and that the flood occurred in 4990 BC. And then, because I'm an engineer, for the next 10 years I checked all the scientific evidence. Is there anything at all that militates against this idea of a world 11,013 years BC? And I went all through carbon-14, all through the sediment in the ocean's floor, and so on. And I wrote, and after 10 years, I found that all is a scam, what they were talking about. And I published a book called Adam When. I think I published it about, let's see, I was maybe 40 years ago.
And from this information, he wrote the book Adam When. This one was first published in 1974. And he takes a look, he says, at the science. And chapter 11 here, it's about the oceans. And he says this is his proof here, that if you look at the chart here of what's in the oceans, the salt in the ocean, and these other chemicals in the oceans showing the oceans must be young. But he's misunderstanding completely about this. This is the residual time that these elements are in the ocean. If you take the element aluminum, you could say the earth is only 100 years old if we look at the amount of aluminum in the ocean. It's because he's misunderstanding the data about the salt in the ocean and the other elements in the ocean. It's just the residual time that it's in there. And so we have to be very careful. This was written many years ago, and a lot of the information's out of date. In the next chapter, he goes on about carbon-14, and there's a chart there as well. When they first started with carbon-14 dating, there was problems. They had to calibrate it. And now they calibrate it with tree rings, ice core samples, and they can get very accurate dating with carbon-14. The Dead Sea Scrolls, they dated many of them before the time of Christ using carbon-14 dating. The Shroud of Turin, they dated and showed that it was a fake from the Middle Ages. So carbon dating can be very helpful if used correctly. If you don't, you come up with the wrong date. Harold Camping also says he's diligently studied the Bible, and he's come up with a date of 4,990 BC as when the flood took place. And he looked at the science and disagreed with the science here, and puts the flood at this date. The problem is, if you look at the archaeology, for example, I was just recently at Jericho, and you can see where they dug down through the layers, and one of the oldest layers there we were taken to see was 9,000 years ago, and there was no flood layer. You can see a destruction layer there you can see where the walls have fallen down there at Jericho. But if you dig down deeper, in this oldest city in the world, you go back 9,000 years and there is no evidence of a flood at all. Also, there is no evidence geologically for a flood at 4,990 BC. There is no geological evidence for this. There is no archaeological evidence. There's no carbon-14 dating evidence. It's just the opposite of this. I was also recently there in Oakland with Harold Camping, and we right after the interview we went to the next day to see the great redwood forest nearby, and these trees and the huge trees and these tree rings and dating back thousands of years. The tree ring system there is over 10,000 years old. One of the oldest trees, the Joshua tree there in California, 10,000 years old. And so we have numerous evidence. We have ice core samples. We have sediment samples, all pointing that there was not a flood back in 4,990 BC. So he is off on the flood date. And he pins down 7,000 years later as to 2011. Yet he's off on the flood, and therefore he's off on the date 2011 as the end of the world. Another important point Harold Camping brings out in Adam When is that he thinks he's figured out the genealogies. That if it says, called his name, that is a direct descendant. If it is not, then it's a calendar system. Now it's true, son of can mean descendant of. For example, in the New Testament, Jesus is called the Son of David. And between Jesus and David, there is 1,000 years, yet Jesus is called the Son of David. So you could have 1,000 years when it says son of in Genesis. Now he says there's a calendar system where one dies and the other one picks up until he dies. Unless it says called his name as a direct descendant. The problem with this is that no Jewish genealogy worked that way. No ancient world genealogy worked this way. They were not meant to be chronological. For example, in Matthew, the genealogy is arranged in a special way of 3 groups of 14 names. They did this so it would be symmetrical. It wasn't meant to be chronological, and Harold Camping misunderstands the genealogies there in Genesis and tries to make it into a made-up calendar system. Now he tries to go for proof of this in the Exodus and the names there, and they add up to 430 years, but that's the way they added in the Old Testament. They would add up all these, and just give you an example here. If we go to Acts chapter 13 and verse 19, it talks about the time of the judges, and the time of the judges was 450 years. Now what did they do? They added up all the judges, all the times of oppression, and you get 450 years. And that's what it says in Acts chapter 13, verse 19. But Harold Camping in his book misunderstands that and says it's 450 years to the time of Solomon. he is misunderstanding this verse, misunderstanding the number 450. They just added up the numbers, where we understand today that it wasn't chronological order, that there is overlapping. The same thing with the kings. If you add up all these, I think it comes up to 480 years, and they arranged it that way, but there was overlapping. There was co-regency, and you have to take these into account or you're going to get all the wrong numbers in the Bible. And again, let's take a look at Galatians 3:17. It mentions 430 years from the time of Abraham to the giving of the law. Yet if you take this as scripture that it must be true 430 years, you're not going to come up with the dates that Harold Camping does. Because he says just alone in Egypt they were 430 years, but here it says from Abraham to the giving of the law was 430 years. And they place, ancient chronologies, place the Exodus, the time in Egypt, as about 215 years or less, because they're counting from Abraham, where Egypt controlled, all the way to the Exodus and the giving of the law. So he's misunderstanding even the New Testament that clearly states these numbers, and he's misusing them, misunderstanding numbers in the Bible. As we can see, Harold Camping is big on numbers, on numerology. But if we look at 2 Timothy 3:16, it says, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. That is the key what the Bible is all about. It's about instruction in righteousness. It doesn't say that it's inspired by God so you can have all this numerology and numbers and figure out the beginning of creation and the end of the world. That is not the thrust of the Bible. He's missing the whole point. The Bible is about instruction in righteousness, how to live your life. Not to spend your time trying to dig through all these numbers and numerology to come up with the end of the world or the beginning of creation. That's not the main point of the Bible. It's not made or written to do that. It's for instruction in righteousness. Okay, well, I appreciate you taking the time to share with us about the end of the world, Judgment Day. And I guess we'll see what happens on May 21st. Myself, personally, I don't think it's going to happen. I've studied the Bible for many years myself, and I've learned the Hebrew and the Greek and all of the studies. But I guess I have to take the different opinion that a lot of things you're comparing seem like apple and oranges and don't fit together. From studying the Bible, and I see that it's not going to happen on May 21st, and I guess we'll have to see on May 21st what happens.
Yeah.